The Buccaneers make an interesting roster move, and there is going to be a ripple effect. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, and one-on-one conversations with me via text message. No ads, no hashtags, no anything like that. Just one-on-one conversations with me. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. And a big thank you. Had an influx of a lot of new insiders. Really appreciate each and every one of you. Been having a lot of fun chatting with each and every one of you. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Baker Mayfield throws some praise around regarding one of the new additions to the Buccaneers roster, and we have an interesting and quite possibly polarizing mailbag question that is coming up for you in a little bit. But let's start things off with the move that the Buccaneers made on Thursday, and the Bucs announced that they waived wide receiver and return specialist Deven Thompkins, citing an injury, leaving the return job open for competition. And I see some of you in the live chat already starting to mention who is going to replace Deven Thompkins. We're going to talk about it. Give me just a second. We will get to that. Now, first off, if Thompkins clears waivers, then the Buccaneers can bring him back and put him on injured reserve. But this not only opens up a roster spot for the team, but as I just mentioned, it creates competition for the return job. So who are the likely candidates to replace him? Before we talk about that, let me remind everyone that there were changes to the kickoff rules, allowing defenders to line up much closer to the return team and for there to be certain zones that the ball needs to go into for either a return or resulting in a penalty. Every team is able to line up with two return men, which most of us thought Thompkins would be part of. There's going to be an emphasis on vision more than anything because of the condensed nature now of the running lanes and the bodies in front of those return men. Yes, they still need to be fast, but it's more important that they are able to see and react to what is in front of them in order to give themselves a chance to break through the crowd and either return the kick for a touchdown or at the very least give the offense really good starting field position. So who on the Buccaneers roster could be in line for those return jobs? The most obvious ones to me that jump out are Trey Palmer. Again, there's that speed that you want, but also rookies Bucky Irving and Jalen McMillan. Those three were the first names to enter my mind when the announcement came through that the Bucs had waived Deven Thompkins. Trey Palmer runs a 4.3 40 and certainly had his moments of navigating traffic through the second and third levels of the defenses that he faced last season. Obviously, catching a kick is very different from catching a pass, but if Palmer can get the hang of that, then the Bucs have a legitimate weapon back, as a return specialist that can take a kick to the house each and every week. Again, as soon as he's able to find a crease, Palmer has that breakaway speed to be able to just immediately get through that level and then go all the way. There's not going to be a whole lot of guys on the field that are going to be able to catch him. A lot like, you rewind the clock a few years and Ronald Jones had that 98-yard touchdown run. That was because everybody was up in the box, and as soon as he got to that second level, he was gone. There was nobody that was going to catch him. Kick returns are going to mimic something like that, that once you get through that first wave, you're going to have a whole lot of green grass in front of you. So it's still good to have a speed guy back there. As for Bucky Irving, he's the first rookie that I'm going to talk about here. He does have kick return experience from college. Between Minnesota and Oregon, Irving returned 14 kicks and averaged 23.9 yards per return. As a running back, he obviously has that vision that I mentioned that you're going to want your returners to have. And I mentioned, how vital that is going to be. Again, you are talking about a lot of guys in a very condensed area now, not nearly as spread out as it used to be. So being able to find that small crease and hit it quickly with burst, that's the reason the Bucs drafted Bucky Irving to begin with. That is what he is so good at. I'm going to be diving into my Bucky Irving breakdown coming up soon. Jalen McMillan is next on the list, but that was a big thing. Trevor Sikkema talked about it on this show. He can find a very small opening and hit it with full speed very quickly. And if he's able to translate that to the kick return game, again, you're talking about a player that can get through that first level and then create a huge play with all that green grass in front of him. And then, of course, the experience as a returner certainly puts him as one of the favorites to be able to land one of these jobs. And then there's McMillan. Again, not the speed of Trey Palmer, but someone with return experience. But McMillan's experience comes as a punt returner. He had 9 punt returns during his time in Washington, averaging just under 10 yards per return. But in 2022, he returned 4 punts and averaged over 17 yards per return. The Bucs could look to him to help on kick return duties, but they also might look to him for the punt return job. And then I'm going to throw out a couple of wild cards before I jump into the chat. The first wild card that I have is Raheem Jarrett. He's another guy that had return experience in college. He returned 10 kicks at Maryland, averaging 17.7 yards per return. He does have 4.4 speed, so not quite as fast as Palmer, but certainly fast enough to cause some serious problems. And then finally, Chase Edmonds. If Chase Edmonds loses out that running back 2 job to Irving, he was a return guy for the Arizona Cardinals a few years back and has that NFL experience there. If the Bucs are looking to get him more opportunities because of snaps that he may have lost to Bucky Irving during this running back competition, or because of the progression of the way things are going throughout the season, they could utilize Chase Edmonds as one of these 2 return guys. And, he averaged just a little over 22 yards per return between 2018 and 2020 when he was used there by the Cardinals. So he is a guy that, may not emerge early on because he is still going to be taking the bulk of those running back 2 duties probably throughout training camp and into the beginning part of the season. But this is a shift that we could very well see after about the first 4 to 5 weeks if Bucky Irving really starts to take off as a running back. Well, now Chase Edmonds snaps are going to be limited, and the Bucs could look for a spark there out of Edmonds in the return game. Early on, especially in training camp, it's going to be a little like musical chairs. Guys are going to be rotating around. They're going to be going in and out. Todd Bowles and the rest of his staff are going to try a lot of different combinations and a lot of different things because just like the rest of the NFL, they're also getting used to these new rules. So there's going to be a lot of trial and error going on in training camp. So I'll forewarn you now, and I'll probably remind you of it later. You might see some things going viral on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram of, really bad returns or mishaps or follies during the return game. There's a lot of trial and error that is going to take place leading up to the season while they get used to these new rules and how things are going to shake out in the regular season. And it's better for those issues and those mishaps to happen in camp in a controlled environment and practice than to happen in live games. But someone is going to emerge and really separate themselves from the rest of the competition. And that honestly is the biggest impact that this move has on the Buccaneers as far as waiving Deven Thompkins. Thompkins wasn't much of a factor in the passing game. And with the addition of McMillan, plus you still have Trey Palmer, you still have Raheem Jarrett, that wide receiver room was becoming a little crowded. Now the Buccaneers can look to some other guys to fill in and take over that return job, opening up a roster spot for another position to keep a little bit more depth somewhere else. I do want to jump over into the chat real quick because I am up against it. Bat W says, problem with Bucky is he's not going to outrun anybody. But again, I'm going to dive into my Bucky Irving game reviews. His 40 time was not all that impressive. Absolutely, I'll give you that. But Bucky is more of a game fast than a straight line speed kind of guy. He does have the ability to take some of these runs to the house. Yeah, he's not a 4-3 guy. He's not a 4-2 guy, but he is game fast. And there is a difference between 40-yard dash in tights at the combine and being able to get away from defenders and take a carry or a return 40, 50, 60 yards and evade defenders. So I will give him that. You're right in the aspect of, he's not a blazing speed kind of guy, but he does have some speed to him. Richard in the chat says, Bucs haven't had a respectable return game since Clifton Smith. Hard to disagree with you, Robert, or I'm sorry, Richard. It's been bad. I mean, to be honest, it's been bad for basically the entire time that the Buccaneers have been a franchise. You had your Michael Spurlock moment against the Falcons back in December of, was that 2007? Clifton Smith was a pretty solid return guy. Remember, they even tried to use Michael Pittman as a return man for a little while to try to get some spark there. But, kick returns have never really been the Buccaneers' bag. Baker Mayfield had some thoughts on a new Buccaneers edition. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights. In my case, I bought a full set of brakes and rotors for my car and my wife's car. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. It really took a lot of the stress off of me when I was ordering those brakes and rotors for my cars, because I knew that they were going to fit or it was going to be taken care of. With eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every day, make sure you are coming back on Monday. Looks like we're probably going to have my Jalen McMillan game review breakdown. Continuing that series, we've done Graham Barton. We've talked about Chris Braswell. I just had Tyke Smith earlier this week. Time to look at Jalen McMillan and what he will bring to the Buccaneers. In the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news. Lots of NBA Finals, lots of Stanley Cup talk, because those are the biggest stories right now. But Locked On Sports Today is streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sarah Walsh of NFL Network had a few things to say the other day regarding her conversation with Buccaneers quarterback Baker Mayfield. And while on NFL Network, Walsh talked about her conversation with Baker and mentioned that she asked him about rookie offensive lineman Graham Barton and said his eyes lit up. She went on to say that Baker told her that Barton is a stud and that he can cover a lot of ground really quickly. Also said that he told her that Barton was quote unquote built for this. Walsh also shared that she received the same sentiments from offensive coordinator Liam Coen and that this was far more than just lip service or them trying to build up confidence in a rookie, that they both genuinely believe that Barton is a difference maker on this offensive line and on this team. We have talked about Graham Barton a lot on this show. You can go back and check out my breakdown of him from just a couple of weeks ago and what I thought when I sat down and watched some of these Duke football games. But there is no doubt that I completely agree with Baker, even though I'm on the outside looking in. I do not have the access, obviously, that Baker Mayfield or Liam Coen do. But Graham Barton is going to be an absolute stud for the Buccaneers. Center is not a popular position to draft in the first round, which is what really lets you know how special he really is. General managers and coaches do not waste picks on guys just to use a pick on a guy. If they're taking someone at the center position with a pick as valuable as the 26th overall pick in the draft, and no, that's not a top 10 pick. It's not even in the top 20, but you are still talking about a first round pick. No one uses a first round pick on a player that they don't believe can come in and be an immediate difference maker, unless you're the Atlanta Falcons wasting a top 10 pick on a quarterback after you just signed one to a huge deal in free agency. But that's a story for another day, and I digress. The Buccaneers struggled a lot last season on the interior of the offensive line, and Baker was sacked 40 times. He probably escaped at least a dozen more on his own, might even be closer to 15 or 20 sacks that Baker evaded. It seemed like every post-game live I was doing, I was talking about Baker Mayfield escaping 1 or 2 sacks in crucial moments. But you aren't just going to see an instant improvement in pass protection because of Barton. You're going to see an improvement in the run game. You guys know as well as I do, the Bucs were dead last in the NFL in rushing offense, even though they had a running back that was just shy of 1,000 rushing yards last year. They've invested in that position again in the draft with Bucky Irving, and they are trying to get things right in that aspect of the game, get out of the basement and become a viable threat in the run game. But that is also a reason to invest highly on a center like Graham Barton. I understand that there is, of course, a chance that Barton doesn't pan out the way I think he will, the way the Bucs thought he will, the way a lot of people think that he will. In fact, about half of the first round picks probably won't pan out to be what teams or media or analysts thought they were going to be. That's just the way that it works. At least half, if not more, of those quarterbacks that were taken in the first round are going to bust. Some of these teams are going to see bigger impacts from their day 2 and 3 picks than they are their day 1 pick. But Barton appears to be as advertised so far through all of this, and that's definitely an incredible sign for the Buccaneers. The remaining looming question is whether or not they got the left guard position figured out as well. Sua Opeta seems to be the leader in the clubhouse there, and in fact, Rick Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times had a column about him early on Friday. I haven't had the chance to sit down and read it quite yet, but there seems to be some rumblings that Opeta is up to the challenge and might be an upgrade over what we saw with Aaron Stinney and Matt Filer last season. So I'm loving everything that I'm hearing about Graham Barton this early in the process. Now we all have to sit here and hurry up and wait to see if it translates to actual NFL game action. Going to jump into the chat again real quick. We got HBK Woo in the chat, says, hello, James. I really feel good about this season. 16-1, only loss to the Ravens. Go Bucks, and then a bunch of heart emojis. You are much more optimistic than I am. I still feel like the ceiling, the absolute ceiling on this team is going to be about 12 wins. I think they're going to be in the 9 to 10 win range. And if they hit that double-digit win mark, I think that's going to be good enough to win the NFC South. Bat W in the chat says Barton was huge for the run game. I agree completely. I'm really excited to see how this Bucs run game starts to shape out with the addition of Barton, the potential of Opeta, and then you add Bucky Irving into the mix. Really looking forward to seeing how different the run game is, and with Liam Coen, making the calls there and leaving some of that play calling ability to the players to see how they feel about things. Really excited to see how all of that pans out. Fausto, I have been chatting it up with Fausto like crazy. He is a new insider. Been loving that conversation. He says Falcons essentially wasted their whole draft. No one they drafted helps them this season. I was actually chatting with a Falcons fan yesterday. He was less than thrilled with the outcome of the Atlanta Falcons draft. And I didn't feel sorry for him in the least. A polarizing mailbag question about the quarterback of the Buccaneers. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on a live Friday edition of Locked On Bucs, and the Locked On mailbag is open. And I had a question come in from Mad Dog, who asked, get ready in the chat, everyone. I'm sure you're going to have takes. Will Baker win a Super Bowl before he retires? That is the Locked On Bucs mailbag question of the day. Go ahead and start dropping your answers in the chat. Will Baker Mayfield win a Super Bowl before he retires? Well, Mad Dog, I wish I had a definitive answer for you, because if I did, I'd hop on FanDuel and make a futures bet right now. But since I don't have a definitive yes or no answer that I can give you with any sort of certainty, here is what I will say. I think that he can. And I think that the Buccaneers are the team he would have the best chance to do it with. The building blocks are all there. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin for now, Antoine Winfield Jr., Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, Graham Barton, Tristan Wirfs, Jordan Whitehead is back, Levante this year, and maybe beyond. This is probably one of, if not the most talented roster that Baker Mayfield has ever been a part of. He has shown that he can win in the postseason, both in Cleveland and in Tampa, and people tend to forget just how close he came to leading the Browns to a win over the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City in the playoffs. And that may go down as one of the worst officiated games I have ever witnessed. And I am saying that as someone who watched it without a dog in the fight. I didn't care who won. I was focused on the Buccaneers' path to the Super Bowl. I just wanted to be entertained. It was playoff football. Who doesn't want to watch? And that game was one of the most awful officiated games I can remember, with at least within the last 10 years. Baker Mayfield has the drive, the desire, the talent, most importantly, the intelligence to win a Super Bowl. And then he has the talent around him to take them deep enough into the playoffs to have that chance. It's all about execution. It's about getting hot at the right time, like they did last year, to be fair, and then playing mistake-free football when it mattered most. That is something that they did not do in the divisional round against the Detroit Lions. Baker had some bad mistakes. The defense had some bad mistakes. You can't afford to have mistakes the deeper you get into the playoffs. And honestly, it's not like the history of the Super Bowl is packed with nothing but Hall of Fame and elite quarterbacks. Trent Dilfer, Brad Johnson, Doug Williams, Nick Foles, they've all won Super Bowls. And if I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, which I tend to do, Eli Manning was a pretty pedestrian quarterback the majority of his career. He's got 2 Super Bowls. Joe Namath is in the Hall of Fame, but if I, again, am being honest, he shouldn't be. He wasn't that good of a quarterback. He won a Super Bowl, and that Super Bowl got him, and the guarantee got him into the Hall of Fame. He became a celebrity more than he was a quarterback. Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl. Jeff Hostetler, Mark Ripien or Ripien, however you pronounce it, Jim McMahon, all these guys won Super Bowls, and I would put Baker up against most of them as a better quarterback. You can even go back and look at Ben Roethlisberger, who won 2 Super Bowls, and in those 2 wins combined, he had 1 touchdown pass. And even that one, I still don't think that Santonio Holmes got both feet down. I still think that was an incomplete pass. I think his right foot was up. And that doesn't include quarterbacks that weren't all that impressive that made it to Super Bowls. They may not have won it, but they got there. Jared Goff, he's much better now with the Lions than he ever was with the Los Angeles Rams. Jimmy Garoppolo, Rex Grossman, Jake Delhomme, Kerry Collins, Chris Chandler, Colin Kaepernick, Stan Humphries, Neil O'Donnell. These are not good quarterbacks. They just weren't. They were guys that managed the game well enough that these super talented rosters around them got them to the biggest sporting event in the world. So to answer your question, Mad Dog, and I'll get to your answers in the chat, I don't know if he'll ever win a Super Bowl before he retires. But if you're asking me if he can win one, or if I think that he's good enough as a quarterback to win one, or at the very least get to one, I absolutely think that he is. And I've thought that since I started saying on this show in February of 2023 that he should be the guy to come in and replace Tom Brady. Those are my feelings on Baker Mayfield. You're going to be hard-pressed to find another guy who is as passionate about the game and as passionate about his teammates as Baker Mayfield is. And then if he continues playing the way that he did last year, this roster is talented enough to go deep into the playoffs and potentially get to a Super Bowl. And you get in one, all bets are off. Anything can happen in a Super Bowl. Going to jump in the chat, see what you guys think. We got Bat W saying, I think Baker is going to have a big year. I agree. I think the touchdowns go up. I think the interceptions probably go up a little bit, but I think you're talking about another year of over 4,000 passing yards, and I think he's going to surpass 30 touchdown passes this year. I expect big things out of Baker Mayfield this year. Siege in the chat. It's very possible, in my opinion. He has as good of a chance, as anybody. Fausto in the chat. Eli has a career 500 record. He's the definition of mid 100%. And someone can check this out and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure every time the Giants made the playoffs, Eli, it's not solely on Eli, but the only postseasons where the Giants ever won playoff games with Eli as their quarterback, they went on to win the Super Bowl. Other than that, they were one and done in every playoff appearance. And I like Eli. I think he's a nice guy. He's a funny dude. But he's not as good of a quarterback as a lot of players that have come through in recent memory. Some don't have any Super Bowls. Some may only have one. I mean, Eli's not as good as Drew Brees or Aaron Rodgers. Each of them only have one Super Bowl ring. Bat W, Baker and Godwin will be big, and it will price Godwin off the team. So this year would be a good year for a Super Bowl run. I actually talked about that exact thing on yesterday's episode. If you haven't checked that out, go ahead and do so. Richard in the chat says Nick Foles, Super Bowl champion. Yeah, I just make it make sense, because it doesn't. We have Yeltsin in the chat. Jalen McMillan's presence already reshaping the wide receiver room. Hopefully Thompkins can be signed to the practice squad. I did talk about that earlier in the episode, Yeltsin. If he clears waivers, he can be brought back and placed on IR. He was waived with an injury designation. So if he clears waivers, the Bucs can bring him back, put him on IR, potentially bring him off IR down the line. They can put him on the practice squad. They can, sign him to the active roster in case another receiver goes down, however they want to handle it, but he has to clear waivers before that can happen. CCS 216. The Steelers-Seahawks Super Bowl was a joke. Big Ben wasn't even great in a game that was so bad that it looked fixed. Yeah, and he beat Matt Hasselbeck, another meh quarterback that managed to make it to a Super Bowl. I was rooting for the Seahawks in that one because Joe Jurevicius was on the Seahawks that year. But yeah, that was such a bad Super Bowl. Sam in the chat says he absolutely can. He has the ability to lead, and he brings the best out in the players around him, creating great chemistry and an atmosphere people want to be in. You are 100% spot on. And with that, I think that is the perfect time to end this episode on that note from Sam. So please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure you are following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Be like Fausto and become a new Locked On Bucs insider. You can do so by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to sign up. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.